Well, that gets even deeper into the realm of belief and faith, Faith. I would define faith as the courage to live as if everything that happened is for our highest good and learning. Now, do I know that's true? I don't know. I can't prove it, but I'd rather live on that basis, that idea, the courage to live as if everything that happened, rather than feel like a victim, why me, and so on.
Welcome to the world of energy, where science meets spirit. Ancient wisdom merges with cutting-edge knowledge, and the possibilities for a healthier, happier you are endless. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cool People, Big Ideas. I'm really excited. I'm always excited for these episodes. I got the chance to meet Dan Millman, the author, the iconic author of The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Last year when I was teaching at Kripalu, he was there. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little starstruck isn't the right word, but he's a big dude in the spiritual world. The movie based on his book starred Nick Nolte. I mean, he's been around and he's written so much. And actually, my first introduction to him was through his book of numerology. And that book really changed my life. It was incredible. And I still use it to this day. It's fascinating work. And when I met him in the teacher's lounge, we were sitting there for breakfast and we just started chatting, and he was the mellowest, coolest, easiest to talk to person. He had no airs about him at all. He was just genuine and real. And what really struck me is he's Dan Millman, right? He's written 18 books. He's taught all over the world. He, before he even started writing, he had an incredible athletic career. He's a world champion. He has a lot of things. He has a lot of notches in his spiritual and warrior belt. And he was really listening. Like, he was more asking questions and listening and wanting to know about myself. And I was there with Hillary, who I co-teach with. He was just present and open and curious. It was such a breath of fresh air. And in that first conversation, I just asked him, could we have a conversation on my podcast? Would you come on? He said, absolutely, no problem. And then I did the deep dive, as I do, and read almost all of his books and was just blown away by some of the works that he has. A Way of the Peaceful Warrior, obviously. I read his memoir that just came out a couple of years ago, and then the book that he pre-wrote about his big teacher in The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, Socrates, if those of you who know him. He wrote his story. Just a prolific author, incredible teacher, incredibly grounded and authentic and open-hearted. And you're going to love him. I just know it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Thank you, Dan Millman, for being here with all of us today. I'm so excited to talk with you.
It's mutual.
Awesome. Let's just dive in. I have been taking a deep dive into, I haven't read all 18 of your books. I'm going to full disclosure there, but I have definitely read quite a few of them. And I want to start right now with, I hate to say favorites, right? Because I really love them all, but this one really, really did a number on me. The Journeys of Socrates. So we're going to start in chronological order of your writings, not of the order that they were written in. So this one takes place at about the end of the 1800s in Russia/Ukraine, all over in that area. And the themes in the book, it seems so topical right now. Childhood trauma leading to massive destruction of lives, themes of lying so much that you begin to believe the lies yourself, the blurring between the truth and the lies, confusing and kind of really, it's like a spell is put on people, and how easy it is to brainwash people into doing really nefarious things. And I just couldn't help feeling that the echoes were so incredibly, strangely, topically strong. So I wonder how you feel about that coming forward from having written this really beautiful book and having all of the themes be exactly, honestly, what's happening today.
Well, to put it in context, my best known book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, describes my relationship, my learnings with um, an old service station mechanic I ended up naming Socrates because he reminded me of the old Greek sage. And uh, 25 years after that, people had asked me over time, well, was this old fellow ever married? How did he end up being this wise and amazing kind of character? And so I projected that back in time. And I was studying a Russian martial art called Sistema, means the system, a traditional art, 1,500 years old, that evolved over time. And I went to Moscow, St. Petersburg. I went to the Lake Ladoga and the monastery island of Olamp. And so that inspired the location where I created this story around, it's a novel, around this character. And yes, I hope it's evocative of our everyday lives today, even though it is intended to be, an emotional novel. Um, so if you'd like to address some issues of today, I'm happy to do that. I'm not sure I can tie it in to that novel, but can tell you it's very close to my heart for various reasons. Somebody who'd read Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which was my first book written in the late 70s, they said, I can't believe the same guy wrote both these books, because I had improved my writing considerably in 25 years, about 16 books in to my career. So now that I'm retired, I can reflect on it all 18 books. And I never wrote a book just to write another book, Lauren. In fact, I didn't write another book after Way of the Peaceful Warrior for 10 years because I felt I'd had what I had to say. But then I met new mentors in my life, and there was so much information I'm so excited to share that I wrote Sacred Journey of the Peaceful Warrior, then No Ordinary Moments, because people ask me, well, I was inspired by your first two books, but how do you apply this stuff to everyday life?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why No Ordinary Moments, A Peaceful Warrior's Guide to Daily Life, was the third book. And there was too much in there to convey in the form of a novel, which is what I did with my first two books. And each book was written organically, like a plane waiting to take off the runway. I never knew which one would be next, but that's how it worked out. So the Journeys of Socrates, I think it's among my best written works. And how it ties in today with reality and with disinformation, misinformation, misunderstanding. People have very different views of the world today because we can only know what we've read or heard or been taught. And some people are taught things that are aligned with reality, whatever that is, and others are misinformed, but they will cling to those beliefs and that worldview, but based on emotional needs, perhaps. So, again, my books do blend fiction and autobiography. Way of the Peaceful Warrior was based quite a bit on my life story, with fictional elements woven in. And I tell people, it's best to look at my other books, my other narratives, as fictional teaching stories.
Okay, there's a lot. There's a lot in there. I like that. So, the themes that really struck and jumped out to me. The Dmitri character who becomes this is a saga. It's like it's really, it reminded me, the storytelling was just so fast paced. I mean, it just gallops, and it's just exquisite. And the so much beautiful nature and teachings within the writing, which I really love. Like, for example, I did not know, and I learned that Shabbat, the Jewish last sort of the day of rest, starts when the first three stars emerge and ends on Saturday night. That's a Friday night. Saturday night when the first three stars emerge. That was so exquisite to just have that in there as part of the teachings. And we learn that Sergei, who becomes Socrates, is both Jewish and a Cossack. And I actually had to look up what the word Cossack meant because I wanted to know. And it's a tribe from eastern Ukraine, but the word itself means free man. And so Sergei was so happy to be a mix of this both. And then we go through this journey where he has all of this trauma and he becomes victimized by this Dmitri character who wants to become him in a way and weaves this narrative of untruth that ultimately he believes. He ends up starting to believe that he is actually Sergei. And that causes all of this angst and, I mean, literally fight to the death. And it just seems to me that this is what is happening right now in Ukraine and Russia. And there's so much in the book about Mother Russia and the devotion to the country. And so I guess the question, not to just tell the whole story of the book again, because you did it so much better, but do you feel that you were channeling this narrative, and are there any learnings that we could pull from that today? And I'll add that with one thing, because this is something that really came out in the book, and we'll get to that as we tie it into Way of the Peaceful Warrior, is how we long for revenge. And the whole thrust of this book is that Sergei, i.e. Socrates, his whole push in this book is for revenge. And he learns his teachings so that he can gain revenge. And so much of the book is about revenge for those who have done us wrong. And that feels like what's going on all over the world today is revenge, revenge, revenge. And then that's not what happened. So you're the teacher, you're the writer. Tell us how we got to that place that revenge didn't, that you stopped that. And is there any learning that we can gain from that globally today? That's a huge question, but
That's a
you
huge
can do it.
question. And it's a good one, though. Well, first of all, yeah, you're right. The theme of revenge drives Sergei because something happens in his life where he needs to go after this other character. The story, the tagline for the book is how a boy became a man, how a man became a warrior, and how a warrior found peace. And that is where the whole book was leading. So there is a certain major section of the book where he is seeking to find this band of men, and he trains very, very seriously, assiduously, dedicates his life to no longer being a bully. You know, in a way, it reflects the state of Israel and Gaza today, not just American politics and petty tyrants, but there's a saying that if you fight the dragon long enough, you become the dragon. And you can see how that might apply in our world today. So everything creates its opposite. And it all comes down to a basic forgetting, an ignorance of who we truly are. And once we've gotten even a glimpse of the fact that each of us has the same consciousness, the same awareness, shining through many billions of eyes. If you peel away all the layers of the onion to who we truly are, you know, if people sit down to meditate, some people it takes 5 minutes, others 50 years, to finally realize when they sit down to meditate and they have thoughts, they realize, I'm not those thoughts, I'm the witness of those thoughts. And if emotions come up, they go, well, yeah, but I'm not those emotions. I'm observing those emotions. I'm the witness. And maybe they see their higher self and they realize I'm not the higher self. I am witnessing it. I'm meeting it. And eventually people realize they are not simply aware, that they are awareness itself, or consciousness. And when that is a realization, not just an understanding or appreciating it intellectually, then we realize that everyone around us, everybody we see in the world, is in a sense the same consciousness, just in different forms, different life experience, genetics, different life paths. And they start to, and then ideas of revenge is like the arm fighting the leg in our own body. We're all cells in the same body of Earth. And the most conventional way of saying it is we're all in this together. Crew members on Spaceship Earth, as Bucky Fuller used to say.
Mm-hmm.
And if we realize that unity type of idea, then ideas of revenge and all the dramas, the day-to-day dramas, I believe if we're to survive in a recognizable form as a human species on this small, delicate planet, I believe we need to shift from what's in it for me and what do I prefer to what's for the highest good of all concerned. We have to make that fundamental shift from competitive mind, with everybody competing, fighting against the other, to collaborative mind. Everyone wants to be loved and understood and appreciated. Everybody on Earth. And there are people who are, of course, insane. There are people who are unbalanced, people who are struggling and suffering. Disturbed people tend to disturb other people. Happy people tend to be present, enthusiastic, kind. So I think it's a long slog, this thing called human evolution. Lessons repeat themselves until we learn them. And that we're learning new lessons every day as a nation, as individuals. So that's how I would address your question.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I jotted down the word forgetting because I think that's such a huge piece of what's going on in the world today. You know, Ukraine and Russia, Palestine and Israel. If you go back far enough, everyone's brothers and cousins, right? And so we forget that. And you said that so beautifully, that we're all one consciousness. Another piece that I really pulled from that, because that part of brainwashing in the book is so strong, not just well, you show the micro through the macro and vice versa, as a great novel does, that it's, you know, writ large in the wars that are being fought, but then small in this little one tribe of people that they're being brainwashed into believing something that isn't true. But at the same time, there is this deep inner knowing that flickers, that's just like, I know that that's not right. But then that kind of gets submerged in and it kind of comes back. And so that thread, if I pull that further, makes me feel that no matter how much we've forgotten and we believe the non-truths, there is that thread of awareness in us that we can't deny if we can get to the place where we can hear it long enough. So that felt hopeful. I know I texted you at one point with a couple of lines from the novel that really were encouraging to me when he's studying on the island that you actually went and studied on, that the measurement of time is so different, so that all these things that are going on that just ruffle the surface, that's not really what's, you can dive beneath that and find the peace. And that actually brought me quite a lot of peace in this ruffled time.
I think what you were referring to, Lauren, is that small, still voice inside of us that knows, that understands, that we sometimes lose track of because our attention is diffracted in so many different ways. Many religions, the Quakers, of course, Unitarian, even the Mormons, and every religion refers to that, trusting, whether they call it the voice of God or another metaphor, motif. Yeah. from that stillness.
That makes me want to go into a different, maybe we will, just for a moment, unpack that a little bit, because so many, and you said it can be the voice of God. So many people use that as, for example, in this country, in the United States, manifest destiny came from God, that we the original people that came through the shores had the right from God to populate the country and to remove anyone that wasn't right. So those voices that are within. So how do you teach, because I'm sure this comes up in your teachings, the difference between that truth, the intuition, the truth, and that other voice that you could say, well, the divine right of kings. Someone's like, God said I'm the king now. You all have to bow down to me. And everyone was like, okay, I guess we will. So how do you differentiate between those two voices?
Well, that gets even deeper into the realm of belief and faith, Faith. I would define faith as the courage to live as if everything that happened is for our highest good and learning. Now, do I know that's true? I don't know. I can't prove it, but I'd rather live on that basis, that idea, the courage to live as if everything that happened, rather than feel like a victim, why me, and so on. The whole idea of God is a belief. Uh, Faith, for many people, is believing something without any evidence. That's the definition of faith, religious faith. But religious faith, the shadow side of faith, the shadow side of belief, without evidence, is one can be credulous, one can be open to believing anything, any conspiracy theory, for example. So in my life, even though I use God as a metaphor all the time, like a favorite quote is, there's God, then there's not paying attention. Or, well, I had a vision many, many years ago that there was this speck of incredibly dense matter that exploded by an act of will and became everything in the universe, alongside the idea of the expanding universe. It exploded, the Big Bang. And so in a sense, God is everything, in everything. People talk about spirituality. Now, I don't know what spirit is anymore, because everywhere I look, I see spirit. Everywhere. Where is not spirit? Where is God absent? Everything we see is good and evil, and we, in our dualistic thinking, is spirit, this miracle of life unfolding. And people ask me, what religion are you, Dan? And I go, well, I'm really not a member of any religion. I'm a friend to all, but I'm a member of none. So my world doesn't rely necessarily on faith, though I love quotations like F. Cardinal Spellman said, pray as if everything depends on God and work as if everything depends on you. These paradoxes. Or the Arabic saying, trust in God, but tie up your camel. So it's a co-creative venture. There's a Jewish story about this fellow named Irving, and he said, look, I've given to charities, every week, but I never win the lottery. Every week. And I've done this for 30 years, and I'm a good man, I'm a kind man, but, and finally he just cries out to God, and a voice thunders it down from the heavens and says, Irving, will you just go halfway with me and buy a ticket? So again, it's kind of, as they say in the New Age, a co-creative venture. We do what we can to bring more light, to be part of the solution, not the problem. Well, this morning I picked up some litter off the street. I didn't throw it, but I picked it up and put it in a can. So the world's a little bit cleaner now. We each do what we can in our own way, whether it's donating to charities, whether it's working for something, we're volunteering. We do what we can, even presenting podcasts and sharing with people and reaching out to them.
Mm.
We do what we can to help, right?
Yeah, I do. I like that. Look for the helpers. That's Mr. Rogers, I think. Um, okay, so now we come to the end of Journeys of Socrates. And on the last few pages, we have a new narrator who comes in and tells this family history that brings us to the understanding that now Socrates is the great grandfather of Danny, who many of us have met in the Peaceful Warrior, Way of the Peaceful Warrior. So we're going to dive into this book. So Journey of Socrates was the master, and now the master comes to teach the student who, when you read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, you didn't know that connection. But now that we've got the Socrates book, we know that Socrates is Danny's great grandfather. Before we dive in, I want to ask you, can I or we talk about Danny as a character, if this is in fact true, separate from you? Because it feels sort of weird to like be critical of someone's spiritual journey, but in the context, I feel like his personality is part of those teachings. So I want to be able to talk about that as separate from you, if that is in fact true, because you say it's a mix.
Well, when someone asks me, Dan, was Socrates really your great grandfather? The most honest answer I can give is the character of Socrates in Way of the Peaceful Warrior was indeed the great grandfather of the character of Dan Millman in that semi-fictional book.
Okay. Okay. I like that. So I'm going to go in a little further and say, um, I didn't read Way of the Peaceful Warrior at the time like most people did, really younger and formative years. And so I read it through my lens of today. And what I felt about Danny, and I felt it was that, you wrote this character like this, that he was gullible and he was a really slow learner and very obstinate, kind of hapless, almost a bit of a buffoon. And it was sort of like in the horror movies when you're like, don't open that door. You're sitting there with him like, get it, Danny, get it. So I wonder, talk about that a little bit as his character versus you, or maybe that was you as well, that sort of hapless. I know you a little bit, but not as a young man. Maybe that was more of your character then. He just seemed very, boy, he just had a big ego. Let's just say it. He just walked in there with a big ego and just, kind of got taken down to size until he could really find his true self.
Yeah. Well, the book emerged after I was about 34 to 39 when I was working on that book. And like any human, I'd made mistakes. I was humbled by life. I did have a motorcycle crash that shattered my right femur in the peak of my gymnastics career as a young athlete. Early on, I was really interested in self-improvement. I took memory courses in speed reading and visualizations and did martial arts and ventriloquism and learned to juggle and did acrobatics and gymnastics and so on and so forth. But one day it struck me that no matter how much I improved myself, only one person could benefit. But if I could somehow influence other people in a positive way, that made my life more meaningful. I had no idea at the time how I would do that. I mean, I was teaching, helping in gymnastics, that's great. For kids, it's really good for kids and so on, teaching, learning handstands and cartwheels and so on. But I had no idea how I would really be an influence. But meanwhile, I was reading, studying, doing zazen, transcendental meditation, exploring life's bigger picture. And one day I was doing a series of articles for a gymnastics magazine, and it was stacking up. And I looked at the stack of paper and I went, wow, that almost looks like a book manuscript. It had never occurred to me I might actually write a book. I mean, a 10-page paper in school was intimidating. And the book took shape and changed and shape-shifted over time, one draft to the next. Now, I had read Carlos Castaneda's early books, the teachings, the Yaqui Way of Knowledge, teachings of Don Juan, but it was all about peyote and mescalito, and psychedelics in the Negual in the Sonora Desert. And I wanted to convey the idea that you could find wisdom anywhere, maybe in an old service station. And I'd met this old fellow, an unusual service station attendant, about 3 in the morning one night. And he made a profound impact on me. And he did remind me of the old sage Socrates for some reason. So I remembered that years later when I ended up getting toward the last draft of the book. And so I wanted to convey how a regular person, a self-absorbed young gymnast, full of himself, which I wasn't entirely, but an adolescent type. I was a teenager still at that time, late teenager, how he could gradually transform. I didn't strategically write it, it just took shape that way. All the books are mysterious, where the way they're written. But somehow that was inside me as seeds through my life experience. And finally, now I don't know if you read my memoir, my final 18th book called Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit.
I did. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to
Okay.
that because
Okay.
it all leads right into that for sure. But I want to unpack for a second here
Yeah.
because in that book, you do write that that was a person that you met that night. You had one night with this man at the Texaco service station.
Yeah.
But you don't give us a lot of details about that night. Could you tell us what happened that night?
Well, I would love to reveal something I've never revealed before, but we ended up striking up a conversation. He did not leap up to a rooftop, as I described in Peaceful Warrior, as a literary device to bring me back into this story. But he was a cosmical guy. He drew some images of universes within universes. He had some theories. And because probably in the middle of the night, early morning hours, there was a magical tinge to it. The stars seemed to twinkle, as did his eyes. And when I went home, actually, I had these lines from some kind of poem, not one I'd memorized, but my own. And I ended up writing like a 15-page, just got home and started writing 3:30 in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, this 15-page poem. Sadly, I don't have it anymore. It probably wasn't much good, but I was inspired, obviously, from that. So I remembered that meeting. And when I ended up writing the book, I said, well, how am I going to convey some ideas I want to share? In fact, in the first draft of the third or fourth draft of the book, I described how I met this old fellow, an enigmatic old guy in a gas station. And then here's what I learned. And the rest was just bullet-pointed self-help ideas. And that was the early version of the book. And then it changed and changed. Then there was more to the story. And I did a radical final rewrite of that, that created the book that ended up apparently changing a lot of people's perspective. And it still does today. I mean, it's amazing. I'm still flabbergasted because so many people wrote, this book changed my life. This book changed my life. They were repeating the same phrase that my publisher, it wasn't me, but my publisher decided to subtitle it, A Book That Changes Lives. It sounds cliched now, but apparently people find it. And I've asked people, what do you mean it changed your life? And I think it opened people's perspective about life's higher promise and potential, about the transcendental. I took readers on a ride from this arrogant young gymnast to somebody who was more sober, mature, evolved, and had glimpsed the transcendent possibility.
Yes, you absolutely did. One of the things that I loved about the book as well is that it teaches how long the inner path is, the diligence, the so slow, the training that you must do, which is really similar to your training as an athlete. But you just brought something up that I'd like to ask. I don't even know if you can answer this because it's sort of like, how does it feel to be you? but because you don't know any other way to feel, you just are you. But you wrote one of the seminal transformative books that's out there. I mean, that's one of the books that people, Carlos Castaneda, your book. I think of Marion Zimmer Bradley. There's some books, The Tao of Pooh. There's some books that really just grab the zeitgeist, and yours did that, and it is still doing that. I mean, they made a feature film about it. It was like a big thing, and it's a big thing for a lot of people. Do you feel that? Do you feel, I know, I mean, my experience with you is that you're very humble, but is there a part of you, like, how does that feel to be sort of this iconic writer, author, teacher? Do you feel that?
Not really. My sense of authenticity, what's real, and perspective, which is the better part of wisdom, I think, keeps me from, it goes right through me. The praise, I mean, I don't believe my own press clipping, so to speak. Some people's ego structure can't tolerate it, and they just get full of themselves. And I had enough recognition as a young gymnast at the time, striving and all that. I still do handstands. I just turned 79 and still do handstands. But
I love that.
no, I recognize my strengths, but it's like I'm hardwired to do that. No praise, no blame. We do what we do.
Mm,
So I have that sense of perspective,
mm.
not not a sense of self-importance really, but Golda Meir had a great quote. She said, "Stop acting so humble. You're not that great." So I I thought that was a good reminder not to be too humble either.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And it's rare, I want to say, and you know this because you work in this world still. It's rare in the spiritual community, in the spiritual world, to be at the level that you are, and to not have the trappings and or the airs about you. You see a lot of that with people that are much less accomplished, and which is to me and this is one of the reasons I was so drawn to you right away, was that I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but you were just every person. You were just present in there, and hello, nice to meet you. And we had a conversation. There was zero airs about you. And I was a little nervous to, like, this is Dan Millman. I don't want to bother him, and you were just like, hey, dude, what's up?
Well,
So
as a
that's rare.
sidebar to your listeners, um, Lauren and I really hit it off in the breakfast room at a personal growth center, Kripalu. We were both teaching, and yeah, when you said, "Hey, maybe we could do a podcast," I went, "Great! It sounds like a great idea." And you since actually did some research. You actually read some of my books, and I was very pleased by that. To do that background check. Um, but yeah, pretty much what you see is what you get in my life. And my wife will be married in 50 years this year. And she keeps me grounded for sure.
Mm, mm. I have some questions about her. Okay. Oh, I lost my thread for a minute because in my head, because you said that I read so many of your books. I was actually originally introduced to your work a couple of decades ago to your numerology book. And I knew you had written Way of the Peaceful Warrior, but I hadn't read it, and that wasn't where I was at the time. And I really got into your numerology book. And when I knew you were going to be at Kripalu, I'm so excited. Then we had this great conversation. And then I went back and I've read now so many of your books, and opened up a whole other pathway into the world of Dan Millman. So, uh, yeah. Okay. So now we're going to get to the most recent book here, which I have right here, and you signed for me. There is your memoir, Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit. And it's such a beautiful book. And I'm so glad that, and I read it a little out of order. I read that first before Way of the Peaceful Warrior. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't read Way of the Peaceful Warrior yet, turn off this podcast right now and go read the book and then come back. Cause big spoiler. On page 2, actually, I reread it. I think it's not even, it's in the introduction. You tell us on page 2 that you are Socrates? Okay, we just have to take a pause for that. That has to land for everybody that you are Socrates. So I wonder, because I've listened to a lot of podcasts with you and read other writings, you still write in his voice quite frequently, and you did in this book. You talk about him in podcasts like I was walking down the street with Socrates. So I wonder if he become a real person? Is it almost like an imaginary friend, but it's not like he has materialized in your world or in your being? What is your relationship to Socrates?
Well, certainly not an imaginary friend, but that wouldn't be too far off the mark. I, I, I could say that Socrates is my muse, um, an aspect of my subconscious, an archetype, if you will. As a matter of fact, if you do the research, the actual Greek Socrates was a warrior, a wrestler, in a
A
difficult marriage,
questioner.
as I recall. I think he was the one that said, by all means, marry. If you choose well, you'll be happy. If you do not choose well, you become a philosopher. Uh, um, so look, 34-year-old, 36-year-old, whatever it was, 1980, 46 to 80. Nobody wanted to listen to some young guy spout wisdom. But if it came out of the mouth of this enigmatic old warrior, then maybe people would listen. And just as, you know, Daniel San in Karate Kid had Mr. Miyagi, and Frodo had Gandalf, and Arthur had Merlin, and so on. There have been many stories of mentors who tutored their young, naive, often naive students. So that's how it manifested. And it's not out of any grandiosity saying I am Socrates, but so many people said, oh, I'm depressed now after reading Peaceful Warrior. I don't have a Socrates in my life. Yes, you do. People have come to my seminar and said, I wish I had a Socrates. Like, well, you do. Um, so the words that he spoke and the experiences were created by me, reflecting elements of my life, things that had happened, visionary experiences, and so on, and glimpses of the light, so to speak. So I don't set myself apart from people. You are quite right. I am every man. That's how I can be
Yeah.
useful to people, because I'm not sitting on some lofty place. And there are people who, they use the Sanskrit terminology or the Zen terminology, and they're wearing the robes and they have the beards, and the beads and all that, and they take on those mantles of a traditional approach. That's one way to go. And some people have a past life in those cultures and they are attracted to that. But I'm more brand X generic. I like to speak common, straightforward English. And convey and reminders. That's all any teacher can do, Lauren, right? I mean, we can remind people of what they already know on some level, but they tend to forget. And so that's what I do, is offer reminders. And also I do my sincere best to live what I teach. Otherwise I wouldn't have the spiritual authority. I would just be mouthing the word. And there are people like that too. But
Yeah.
I'm a pretty good example. Albert Schweitzer was the one who said, in influencing other people, example is not the main thing. It's the only thing.
Yes. I love how you explained that that we all have a Socrates within
Sure.
us, because of course that is what everyone wants. Everyone is still seeking and seeking and seeking. And okay, so now we're going to go back. So that was on page 2 of your memoir, but then we get this whole unfolding of all of the seeking that you did to get to the place where you are now, calm and grounded and peaceful. But that wasn't always the case. And as I'm following you through the book, it was quite fascinating because you're the same generation as my mom. Actually, I think you're almost the same age. And she was also in that vanguard of spiritual seekers. I, in fact, met Ram Dass when I was 3 through her. Obviously, I was with her because I was 3. I wasn't like going to ashrams or going to anything. He
Right.
was still Richard Alpert at the time, I believe. But so you do this whole journey, and on a lot of it, I'm also feeling the same way that I was when I was read Peaceful Warrior. Is what are you doing this in this cult or with this teacher? They're crazy. Do you not see how crazy they are? But you spend years and years and spend money and time and you're learning, but there's also a lot of disillusionment, it felt like. And I wonder, now there's a yoga studio in every corner and everyone's meditating and chanting and there's retreat centers everywhere and there's a million things and a million teachers. But back then, that was not the case.
Right.
So the field was not holding all of that wisdom. You were part of the generation that opened the doors of that and literally opened the doors to Kripalu, to Omega, to Essen, like you and your generation. And so then I was really, with you on that. But it was just fascinating to go on that journey. It felt really difficult at times, even just reading it. Like, oh, I felt for you. I'm like, Danny, you just got married. Get out of there.
Oh boy. Well, yes, and I can comment. I describe a 20-year period of initiation because many people who just read Peaceful Warrior, that's the only book they read, and they see the movie maybe, one or the other, and they say, "Oh, Dan learned a bunch of stuff from this old guy in the gas station. Now he teaches." But there is quite a bit more to the story, so I felt I
Yeah.
needed to share it. And it's also about the spiritual search. My quest, 20 years with four radically different types of teachers, from the professor with a spiritual technology, a school for enlightenment, to the guru, a direct transmission of the divine, and so on, forming a community around him and being part of that community, and then the warrior priest, and finally the sage who brought me back to earth. So that describes, but I did want to share with you because you mentioned Ram Dass, a couple of Ram Dass stories. Um, when I lived in San Rafael, California, and a friend of ours, a friend of mine through my publisher, was a friend of Ram Dass, and she said, "Hey, I know he's read your book, Dan. Why don't here's his phone number. Why don't you give him a call?" So I called him up, and he did pick up. And I said, Ram Dass, I said, this is before his stroke. I said, I'd love to invite you to our house. We're 15 minutes away by car. And I said, I'll teach you a seat drop on the trampoline in my backyard. And he said, that sounds like such fun, but I'm just leaving for a trip, a speaking engagement. So I said, well, okay, another time. So we didn't get together, but about 3 months later, I was giving a pro bono kind of presentation in Berlin, Germany, at the Peace University, and I walked through the dining area, and there he is, Ram Dass. So he lives 15 minutes away from my house, and I meet with him in Berlin. And then a couple of years, maybe 10 years after that, but again before his stroke, I was on an airplane flying to Philadelphia, I think it was, and he was also speaking at that event. And I look across the airline aisle, and there he is. And so he moved over to a seat next to me, and we had a nice talk for about an hour.
Mm.
And I said, I
Wow.
just feel like calling you Richard, from Richard Alpert, before Ram Dass.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, call me whatever you want. He seemed like a really, really great guy.
Mm.
Anyway,
That's the
that was
kind
just
of
my
field
Ram Dass
that's
story. But he was one of my early
it's
inspirations as well. I remember when I was a young coach at Stanford University, one of the gymnasts said, I've got this LP, long play record, about this guy named Ram Dass. And so he played me. That was the first time I heard his life
mm,
story that he wrote
mm.
in Be Here Now.
That's the field that you just were kept being drawn to him, that now the field of the spiritual teaching and teachers is so much bigger and there's so many more people within it. And in a lot of ways, that's a wonderful thing because now we're sort of spreading these teachings. And I feel like in your book, in your memoir, you really did, you took us through the whole journey and the challenges and the difficulties. And to the place, like you said, now brought you back to earth, grounded, and in this wonderful way that you continue to teach now is not about the guru or the professor, but it's these teachings that you have digested and have become you that
Right.
you share so freely and so gracefully.
Right. Yeah, I don't just
Um,
parrot the words of the various teachers, though.
mhm.
Sometimes I'll quote them or say something that was from them, but they just more open doors internally. Um, so now I feel like a colleague rather than the
Mm.
eternal student. And it was the guru who pointed out that the search only reinforces the sense of dilemma that sends us seeking in the first place. You know,
I
so
like
to be a
I
seeker
like
is
that
like,
a lot.
what's wrong with right now? What's wrong with who you are? Um, we're perfect, just not yet perfected, but we're perfectly being who we
Mm.
are, and to trust our life unfolding, and to remember that wherever we can't lose our way, because wherever we step, the path appears, and it may be winding. But these are some of the reminders I like to offer.
I'm gonna write some of these down and put some sticky notes out. That seeking one is really piquant and pertinent. I'm a Sagittarius, and every sign has like the one thing that they are. And Sagittarius is I seek. And it has been sort of this mantra through my life. I'm always seeking. But I like that. It just reinforces the discontent with what is, which of course then doesn't lead to the contentment that we're seeking.
Yeah. Also, you brought up about how many people are teaching today, young people and older people, and online. And on one hand, it's like one light, many lamps, right? And different people communicate and reach out to other subgroups, and it's all very positive. On the other hand, some of the teachers haven't really awakened to the degree that they're just kind of they. But I don't know. I believe in the martial arts, for example. You can learn one day, teach one day, and teaching
Mhm,
is a great way to learn. So
mhm.
it's all a higher good in my view. But we need to discern um, the message and whether it fits us. One of the most fundamental things I remind people of is there's no best teacher, no best book, no best religion or philosophy or path or diet or system of exercise. There's only the best for each of us at a given time
Mhm.
of our life. So life is an experiment. We have to find out what works for us.
Yeah. And you really showed that clearly in the book studying with these 4 teachers and the disillusionment when these teachers didn't you say you walk the walk, and I see that in you, but some of these teachers that you studied with did not, and you had to discover that the hard way, and that's very it almost ties us right back into that, ability, in your first book and in the world today, to convince people to believe things that aren't true. That happens in the spiritual world so often that we give up our power to somebody that we think is going to save us, and we see what happens in the world politically when we do that. We see that happens in our own souls and hearts spiritually when we do that. And your book was a really beautiful, really honest example of the trials that you were all in, and then you were like, "Whoa, I think I got to go all out on this," and just pull the things that work for me, but no longer. It's like take the teachings, leave the teacher in some senses, at least in a couple of those scenarios.
Well, and I want to say I have gratitude to all the teachers I've had for all their flaws. One of the repeated themes in my latest book is that all teachers are human and all humans have flaws and foibles. And so a teacher can be brilliant and helpful and useful and something of a philanderer or drunk at the same time. Chogyam Trungpa was probably an alcoholic, brilliant Tibetan teacher. So we have to do discern the good and take what is useful and but not idealize any teacher or put them up on pedestal.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
And
That's
by
a
the way,
really big one.
disillusion is a really
Yeah.
positive thing. It's a freeing from illusion, right?
Yeah, true.
So
Sure. Yes.
So,
There's the
yes, I did
teachings.
have reasons to move on from each teacher, but that's not because I've grown beyond them or they're really bad. No, they are human beings, but it was time for me to move on, and
Mhm.
that led me to discovering or finding other mentors or teachers. And but
Mm.
nature has always been my primary teacher. Just watching trees bend in the wind, waves breaking on the beach. Um,
Mm,
the Japanese call it forest bathing. I spent time walking through the park this morning, earlier on.
mm,
So
mm,
I really
mm.
enjoy that natural world. When you're paying attention, you can learn a lot that way.
Yes, yes, yes. That is the greatest teaching. Absolutely. And then there's not last and not least, but let's talk about joy. I loved how you wove her through Way of the Peaceful Warrior because I had, of course, met her already and realized and knew she was a real person. And I love in your memoir how she gets these, they're not even sidebars, but they're these blocked out where she says what is going on for her. So now we get to hear from Joy herself. It's so beautiful and to use your word again, co-creative. Talk about that inspiration to include her in this book. And I don't know if she's in the other. She is not in any of the others that I've read, but there's like 3 that I haven't. So maybe she snuck in.
Oh, well, in this particular book, now Joy has been my primary editor in the sense of she would read the first drafts, the first horrible drafts of all my books. There's a book I wrote with my daughter Sierra called The Creative Compass, Writing Your Way from Inspiration to Publication. And it's I think it's one of the better books overall on writing, perspective on writing. And one of the chapters is permit yourself to write badly so that then you can write well. So I've had to allow myself to write badly on my first drafts. Ernest Hemingway said the first draft of anything is crap. He didn't use the word crap though. Um, and um, so Joy is willing to read the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. And that's what makes a book, the rewriting. And so when she was in my third or fourth or fifth draft of the latest book, she said, Dan, I was with you, through the time with the professor and the guru and the warrior priest and to some degree the sage. And she said, I have a different perspective. What if I wrote some things? And I went, that's a great idea. So that's how it happened. And
Mm.
she wrote it, and I did very little editing just for, just to clean it up a little bit, prune it, very little. And so Joy and I figured out where to put it in the book. So that was a co-creative venture. Now she only has about 10 pages of material overall, but still, I'm so glad that happened and that she said, why don't I share something? Because she hadn't done that in
Eh,
any other book.
I love that. And you said she only had ten pages or so, but it's quite impactful
Yes.
because it really does, you're the author, and even a book of nonfiction, right, is still you're crafting it and designing it and taking us in a way that you want to take us. And then she comes in and she's like, "Hey, actually, this is what was going on for me." And it just really gave us this, it was sort of the yin and the yang perspective.
Yeah.
And I felt like it really it made the book come alive in a way that I don't think it would have without that.
And it just happened one day.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I'm so glad that I got to meet her too. And she is her name. I mean, it was just beautiful to meet you both like that. Um, so you've shared about this already, but as we kind of come to a close, we're in a very interesting. Let's use that. May you live in interesting times. So we are living in interesting times, and I know you still teach, and um, so I wonder if you would share a little bit as people really are struggling, uncertain, angry. There's a lot of anger in the world. There's a lot of desire for revenge in the world at all levels, no matter where people are on whatever spectrum they're on. Everyone thinks that everything is other people's fault, and I need to take all of that is going on, and it's so loud and unnerving. And so, what teachings could you offer us to come into a place where we don't feel like we're putting our head in the sand. We don't also feel like we're just spinning our wheels, that we're able to do good in the world, maybe affect change, and also stay with a peaceful heart. I feel like these are the teachings that you have taught. So, can you share with us what would you leave us with to help?
Right.
Help,
Well,
Dan,
I
help.
see everyone as a peaceful warrior in training, Lauren. We're all striving to live with a peaceful heart, but there are times we need a warrior's spirit. And I don't mean about fighting, except the inner battles with insecurity, self-doubt, fear, that sort of thing. But in terms of externally, I studied Aikido, one of the number of martial arts that I studied, and you use a force coming at you and you use it. You step out of the way, let them go where they want to go. Um, and there's an idea of radical acceptance. My colleague Byron Katie writes about that. She calls it loving what is. Well, I'm not sure I love everything it is, but I've learned to accept it as a natural part of our process of evolution unfolding. We're learning valuable lessons, hopefully, and sometimes we rub our noses in it, so to speak. And these are difficult times, but I also know that daily life is a form of spiritual weight training. You don't lift any weights, you don't get any stronger. So adversity, we all can appreciate on some level the benefits of adversity. Sometimes digging out of a dark hole gives us the strength to climb the mountain. So that's how I view the times today. These are dark times. I'm not in denial about it. Not just in the United States, but all over the world. There are tendencies toward autocracy, limitation of various freedoms, and so on. And in my newsletters, anybody can go to my website, peacefulwarrior.com, and sign up for our newsletter. And I share favorite quotations once a month in my newsletter. And I've written some essays also. The archives are available on reality, on belief, topical events that may be relevant today. So that's a good resource if somebody would like to stay in touch. And there are some online courses, that sort of thing. So, yeah. I get the feeling, since we're drawing to a close, that this is maybe the beginning of an extended conversation, because I know you read all these books and must have more questions. So maybe at another time we can get together again.
I would love that. I would love that. And thank you for sharing those resources. We'll put those in the show notes as well. I actually am also on the mailing list. I'm 3 moves in to the 4-minute daily warrior workout, your 4-minute training.
Great.
That you've done every day for 30 years, you say. So I'm
probably
going to work on that.
Almost. Yeah.
For 50 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. It's been so wonderful talking with you, and doing the research for this was quite enjoyable. I've looked at videos of you at the World Gymnastics Championship, and it's just been really fun coming all the way through to today and getting to hear your wisdom. I'm already looking forward to going back and listening to this again and taking notes. I just really appreciate your grounded, calm, and organized ideas of how we can be on the spiritual path with open hearts and a warrior spirit. So thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate your time.
Head in the clouds, feet on the ground. And thank you, Lauren.
Alrighty, Energy fans, that's a wrap on another positively charged episode of Energy Works. Lauren, this is the part where we get to use our energy puns.
It's been electrifying, hasn't it, Blaine? We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
If you're feeling amped up and you want to keep your energy flowing, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform.
And we'd love to hear from you, so please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to deliver content that resonates, so light up our inbox.
And spark a conversation with your friends to tell them about us. And we'll see you next time on Energy Works.